Okay, Alistair, the previous part we were dealing with your initial
Yeah.
downloads.
Yeah.
So you've drawn a number of drawings and had a large number of experiences of different types of beings. Is that correct?
I have, yes.
So can we start discussing that?
Yeah, basically, the following year, in the beginning of it, around January time, I was walking around in Shepherd's Bush area, which is quite a populated area, but I decided to take a scenic route around to get to my flat where I lived. And I walked up through White City and I ended up in the Scrubs, Wormwood Scrubs, which is a park next to a prison. And I have a drawing here of this UFO, which is a triangle-shaped UFO. I call it the hovering triangle-shaped UFO. The balls each have a bright glowing light. Okay, it doesn't make much sound, if any at all, and it hovers, and it was moving backwards and forwards above me.
Now, what time of day is this?
Around
time
11
of year?
p.m.
11 p.m.
Yeah.
What was the weather like? What was
Cold.
cold,
Yeah.
cloudy, or
It was slightly raining, just a tiny bit of rain.
so? There's essentially you weren't confusing it with stars or things like that.
It was very low down. So stars, you can see that they're very high up and they're small. This thing was big. I could clearly see it, and it was.
And you could see a defined shape. It wasn't as if you were just joining three dots.
No, it didn't just have. It wasn't just three lights in the shape of a triangle. It was three lights connected to each other with some form of material.
Now, I mean, if you were to hold your thumb at arm's length, what size? Could you be able to obscure the object with your thumb, or would the object be bigger than your thumb?
I would still be able to see some of the objects. I'd probably be able to cover half of the object.
So, I
with
mean,
my
this
thumb.
would be much bigger than the moon or the sun then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was very clear. It wasn't like far away and a little dot or anything like that. It was close and bright, and I could see, the connections between the lights. So there's three lights in a triangle shape, and they're all connected as part of the ship or the spacecraft. I wouldn't say it was a spaceship. I'd say it was a spacecraft, like a small, it's akin to what we would have in our, aerospace. We have jets. I'd say it was like a jet. Yeah.
So, how was it flying? What did it do?
It was hovering, and it was hovering backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. However, I didn't see it straight away. What happened first is I was standing in the grass, and I got punched by a being which I couldn't see because there wasn't directly there. So I would look around me 360 degrees, and I'd just been punched in the back of the head, and I couldn't see anyone that had just punched me. And then it materialized, the being which I believe punched me, and it made a sound that was like oof, like that. It was like a oof sound, and then it looked at me, and then it punched me again in the front of the face from far away.
It hit you with it, like its arm?
With a
it
fist.
wasn't a weapon or something?
Fist.
Yeah.
It could have been a weapon, but it was its body. It could have been the weapon could have been part of its body, but it felt like a punch, and it looked, it had an arm and it moved its arm forward, but I was far away. So what I believe is that the being was able to punch through space. So for instance, I could be far away, but it could still hit me somehow through space. A bit like, I mean, I've spoken to a military, someone high up in the military who's been asking me about this stuff, and he said if you had to name what it was that it was doing, succinctly, what would you say it was doing? And I say wormhole punches.
Right.
So that's the ability to just punch someone, even if they're far away or even if they're on the other side of a wall.
So you mentioned the military there. Have you been interrogated by the military
Yeah,
about these
I
experiences?
have, yeah.
And what did that involve?
Well, one of them usually comes over from the US and meets me, in London and takes me for a meal, and we have a very, very long discussion. I've also been asked to write my experiences down and send them in the post rather than email. I've been told not to email them. I have to send them in the post, either on a disc, as documents on a disc, or just physical documents.
And you don't have to put any silver paper in it or carbon paper in the.
No.
Yeah, maybe you should do that anyway because they can still read letters and things.
Yeah. No, they say that there's a chance that the information will get read by other people, but they're not too worried about that. But they said just post, not email.
How did the military get involved, asking you questions about your experiences? What led to that?
That's been quite a long time. I mean, I was connected to the military before this actually happened to me. I was working in a facility which would be the alternative to staying in a hotel. So people would stay in this facility rather than a hotel because they would get to do activities on a day-to-day basis all arranged for them, and it's more like a flat rather than a hotel.
So I mean, this is even before your event in Earl's Court, where your initial thing with
this is before the download, event and the Vivek character and the warped head-shaped being which appeared after.
Could you explain those? Like, could we turn the clock back and explain really
Sure.
where it all started?
Yeah, I started that job when I was 19.
What job is this?
Basically, you work in a facility which is an alternative to staying in a hotel. So they
Was that alternative to staying at a hotel at Earl's Court?
No, it's staying in central London. It was above a casino.
An accommodation block. I mean,
Exactly.
I mean, in other words, it was a paid for.
Yeah, they pay the same amount that they would pay if they were staying in an expensive hotel, and they get taken to different parts of London every day by a different person, and they also got taken to dance classes and self-development workshops and things as well.
And what is there a name to this?
It's called immersion training.
Immersion training.
Yeah.
And you applied for this job, or were you selected for this job?
I was hired by a family member who'd started it up. He'd had the idea.
Right. Are you able to talk about that?
Not really.
Not
Not too
really.
much.
Well, can you tell us what you can say about that? But in order to build the background as to what...
Very elite clients, billionaires, military people, doctors, surgeons, very elite client list.
And for what purposes? Protection or dealing with ETs or...
It isn't specifically related to these things. It is a little bit fringe, but it's actually purely self-development. So they pay for the week of residential experience.
So are you exposed to different cultural things like dancing, so you know how to dance properly, or you know how to eat properly? In other words,
nutrition, fitness, dance.
Keep your elbows off the table, eat the right food.
Yeah, self-development,
It's sort of officer training?
Yeah. Basically, one of the clients, I was managing this experience for these people, and I was living in the place. I was living in the facility. There was more than one. There was two. Sometimes there's been three, and someone very high up in the U.S. military came to stay, and I was talking to him, because I would talk to the clients of an evening when they get back in from their day's activities, and he started talking about the television program Lost, and it had, I think it was in maybe its first season.
Yeah, first season.
Yeah, first season, and he was wondering, because it was so mysterious, what's actually going on, and he asked me some of my opinions, and I gave my theories, and my theories were quite advanced. And he found me interesting, but we didn't talk about ETs or anything like that. But then we kept contact by email, and then when I had my experience, I was talking to him, and I said to him I had an experience, and he asked me what it was pertaining to, and I said, oh well, it was it could have been ET, it could have been extraterrestrial, and as soon as I said that, and because he knew me before, and he knew that I was very compos mentis and very rational, he knew that I probably wasn't lying.
Now, what relation has this got to do with the series Lost? Are you saying that there are certain things in the series Lost which are designed to, shall we say, stimulate people in the population group to...
Basically, my opinions on what was happening in the program were quite advanced. I gave good theories, because it's very supernatural. You know,
I mean, for somebody who hasn't seen Lost, could you give it a quick synopsis of what the program Lost is?
There's an aeroplane crash above the ocean, and the plane splits in half, and half the plane ends up on one half of a lost island, and the other half ends up on the other half of the lost island, and the people begin living on the island because they can't get a rescue mission because they don't have transmissions and their mobiles aren't working, and they find all kinds of paranormal things happening on the island. So it just builds up more and more paranormal activity happening on this island that the passengers of the passenger jet have ended up on.
Apart from the fact that when a jet falls apart, it's unlikely a lot of people survive in real life.
Quite a few people survived in the program. Partly, it's partly believed that it's like a miraculous island where miracles happen. So that's part of the explanation of how they've ended up surviving the crash in the first place. They're not actually at some points they're not actually sure if they're still alive anyway. They're not sure if they're in some sort of afterlife. Because the island is just so strange and they've had no contact with the real world, so they're not even, one of them even jokes that he's not sure what time period it is. Like they're not even sure if they've gone back in time,
And so your potential answers or solutions to what happened in Lost was a key factor in that military guy
making friends with me. Yeah.
So do you feel that he searched you out to start with, or it was just a happenstance?
I think it was just happenstance.
Yeah. And are you able to reveal what agency or alphabet agency or department was he working for?
Biometrics.
And was that in the UK or
US?
US. The way you said biometrics implied to me that maybe it implied involving other beings.
It probably does, because at the end of the day they're working with mapping. And they're working with identity and mapping identity using biometrics, which is like way more advanced than just a fingerprint. So obviously I think that they are connected with ETs.
And they're tracking ETs in the population?
Probably.
Now, how do you feel about that?
It unsettles me.
Why does it unsettle you?
Because in the mainstream media they don't really talk enough about ETs. They don't give enough education. Yeah. On ETs. There isn't enough information there. Is
there anything you could say now which would be able to contribute to educating people about ETs?
There's a lot I could say about
well, why don't you say it?
Well, you need to understand there is, the distinctions between ET, EDE, so, extra-dimensional entity, extraterrestrial. So, like terrestrial, the word terrestrial comes from terrestri or terra, which basically means Earth, and not Earth as in this planet Earth, as in Earth. So what extraterrestrial basically means another planet. Extra dimensional means another dimension or interdimensional.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, different. Basically, if you think about time. You travel through time, but there's you sort of leave a snake behind you through time. Your body is in different positions and everything, and all of those positions exist in the past, and you travel from the past through the present into the future. And so basically, if you think of it as slices, there's you now, there's you a few moments from now, and if you think of them all as slices that are next to each other, so when you're in one of them you can't see the other one, right. but it is there because it was there because you were there, so it's next to you. So if you imagine that there are things that are next to you which you can't see but they are there, so we're in one dimension, there could be a dimension right next to us but we can't see it, but it is there, just like the dimension of me talking a few moments ago is there, sort of behind me in my timeline, So think of time first to understand how there can be another dimension, and then think of other dimensions as well, like spatial dimensions, different frequency ranges. So
now, what do you mean by different frequency? Do you mean a different state of matter or different?
Yeah, different state of matter, an actual there could, actual frequency ranges. So, for instance, our eyes only see a specific range of light waves, and our ears, dogs hear more than we do. Dogs can hear higher pitches, and certain insects can see different details. So, for instance, a spider web to a fly has a bit more color to it, if that if that makes sense, because the fly picks up on the way it reflects the sunlight,
And it's in the interest of the fly not to fly into that, so it's going to give a lot more perception to it.
I think actually what happens is the fly gets attracted to it. The web to a fly looks more attractive than it does to us, because the fly sees all of these lights and things,
and then it thinks how interesting it is, and then it gets
flies
caught
into it. Yeah. So if we don't see every frequency range of light, we don't hear every frequency range of sound. So just on that level, there are worlds around us which are there, but we don't perceive them. And if you want to take it a level further, our senses, we're on a specific vibrational pitch. Like my hand touches my hand, because they're in alignment. They're on the same pitch of density of matter. And if I went to a higher frequency range, if I was more like photons rather than cells, I would have a much thinner density. And if I went even higher, let's say I went to the level of like a gamma ray, I'd pass through a wall. So there could be potentially a level where you pass between universes if you're on a specific frequency range. And that's how I believe the UFOs that are able to get from one planet to the next, or one dimension to the next, I think that they go into a different density of matter. So they've
So essentially, extraterrestrial means that you're staying in the same frequency range of existence.
Yeah.
Whereas extra-dimensional means you're shifting frequency. So basically, one is shifting distance across space-time.
Well, the extraterrestrials might be using extra-dimensional technology to travel the distances, but they are still extraterrestrial. So they're on one planet in another galaxy, and they have the technology to turn their spaceship onto a different frequency, a frequency range similar to light, like photons, and then the amount of propulsion required to make the ship move would be much less, because it's much lighter. So they would have less propulsion requirements, and they would have more speed. They would be able to potentially, if they can go to a high enough frequency, they would be able to possibly just travel from one galaxy to the next in a matter of minutes, because they might be able to go faster than the speed of light. If they can go to a frequency range higher than the frequency range of light, so they're even thinner, the density. Yeah. Exactly.
As some people say, the speed of light is a constant, it's not a limit.
Not a limit. No, I don't think it's a limit, because they're.
So okay, we're sort of speculating at the moment. Can we get back to the guy that you talked to in the military, and what involvement did that have? What happened with him? How did that relationship develop?
Well, we spoke in emails. He would come to visit London. He stayed
but these private emails, in the sense that they came from his private email address, or did they come from an agency?
They come from his private email address.
So he always kept the agency side out?
He did, yeah.
Was there any feeling that he was essentially operating from his own personal interest point of view?
He was showing my work to the military.
Now, what was your work, and what were you showing?
He was asking me how we would defend against extraterrestrials.
Why would we need to defend against extraterrestrials?
Because they might be hostile.
How do we defend against extraterrestrials?
Well, I was saying to work with basically bacteria, So I was saying to investigate the types of bacteria that we have on the planet, especially underground, because if they are biological and they don't have the years and years of evolutionary immunity that we have, to investigate basically biological means of defending.
Why underground? Because on one of the earlier Basis series, David Griffin and some researchers have discovered this goo, a nano thing now.
Yeah. I'm familiar with this.
So could you tell us all about that, please?
Well, some people believe that I have been modified by this goo that you talk about. I'm not sure. I just, there's a few people that have.
Now, who says that? Why and what? Tell us the whole thing.
Okay, the reason why one of them says it is because under normal lighting conditions, like in a like the lights in a house, like from light bulbs and things, from certain angles, I've got a bit of redness, like I'm a tiny bit red.
Yeah. We've got red lights on.
So it doesn't. Yeah. It's.
Do you think could we modify the lighting here now to see that?
Yeah, if you'd like to.
How would that best be done?
Just turn off the red light, and we'll have the normal white ones.
Okay. Well, we're going to turn the lights off here. We're going to just do this.
As long as it doesn't mimic sunlight.
Provided it doesn't mimic sunlight.
Yeah, because in sunlight I reflect the light and I'm white. Whereas in normal light, I'm slightly red. Basically, my skin tone in this kind of lighting, like artificial lighting, it's got a slight redness. It's got a little bit of red to it. But in direct sunlight outside, my skin is like white. Rather, there's no red. It's white, and it reflects the light. So that means that my skin is reacting differently to sunlight and artificial light, and it wasn't always like that. So, for instance,
we've got the door outside.
Sure.
We're going to simply open the door.
Okay.
And if you're able to walk this way, and we'll just bring your microphone with you. This will. Okay. Now, what you're saying is that now in sunlight, I
reflect the light. I'm very white, whereas in normal light, I'm a bit red. So there's a big difference between red and white.
Now, what's normally under television, there are people with certain skin types, and the sunlight or the light can be very strong and can actually illuminate the surface underneath the skin.
Yeah, but the thing is, I wasn't like this before. Something happened when I was 19 involving sewage, and that's when this happened. So I used to have like a normal skin tone in the same skin tone in front of sunlight as I had in artificial light, and then something happened where I became extremely white in sunlight and slightly red in normal light.
And you're talking about this black goo.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very it was a traumatizing experience for me. I became unwell from being exposed to sewage in a well under the ground.
Where was the well?
It was in a Gloucester Road. It was near Gloucester Road. It's a disused well, and it has an underground sewage thing, and it came up out of the ground.
What do you mean it came up?
And I was living in a room that was built into the well, and I was breathing in the gas from the sewage for a couple of months.
What do you mean a room built into the well?
Sorry?
What do you mean by a room built into the well?
I was living in a basement flat.
Yeah.
And the room that I was staying in was built into the well with a door that leads into the well, so you could go out into the well and walk around. And I breathed in the gas from the sewage. And since that time, that's when my skin has become so illuminated.
Okay, apart from just getting maybe ill or unwell from sewage, why would the military be interested in that?
Because the owner of the well is also a military engineer, very, very high up military engineer.
So what is wrong with the well?
They fixed it, but there was a sewage leak coming from under the ground. So sewage came up out of the ground, but it was very dark. And when I told my friend about this sewage, he said that sounds like a substance that's under the ground that he's heard of, which can modify your body
Okay, well, what we'll do is
genetically.
we'll go back inside and take it from there. Well, thank you very much. Impromptu change and everything else. Okay.
As you can see in this light, artificial light, my skin is quite normal. It's it's got it's a bit red. However, outside in direct sunlight, my skin reflects the light and is very white. It's actually incredibly white. I look like a bright white person standing there. And people have commented on this. A lot of people who've clapped eyes on me when I'm standing in direct sunlight have said, "Hang on, you're bright white."
Now, the important thing about this is different to when you were before you went
before 19,
before that well incident.
Yeah, I was.
So, what exactly is that whole thing about?
Okay, I was living in a basement flat, and the room that I was staying in was built into an underground well, and there was a door to the well, so you could go out and you could walk around in the well.
And what size of well is this? That you
Quite large, a large one, and it's not like a small one with a bucket. It's like a very big one.
Now, did it lead anywhere? I mean,
yeah, there's some underground pathways, and they lead to underground rivers and things underneath London.
Can you explain and explore any more about that?
Yeah, if you go through a specific door and you go through, you end up in a room. If you go through a hole in the wall in that room, you end up under the ground, and you can walk around sort of in the sewers.
Now, what do you mean, sort of in the sewers?
Well, there's only so far you can go, but you're in the sewage system, and there are if you were to drill more holes in more walls, you'd end up in one of the underground rivers because there's water flowing behind the walls.
Now, what on earth would somebody have an apartment, or why were you placed in an apartment?
We were just renting an apartment from a military engineer.
You were renting an apartment from a military engineer.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
It just happened. It just was a coincidence. We were renting the apartment, and it just happened to be that the landlord was a military engineer.
And he happened to give you this thing which links you into the underground sewage system of London.
Yeah.
And this just happens to have a gas which comes from it, which converts.
Well, what happened is fluid, like sewage, came up out of.
What do you mean, like sewage? Now, we need to get the details.
It is sewage. It came up out of the ground, and
way?
it rested on the floor of the well, and the air that I was breathing in was coming in directly from the well. So I had two windows.
Yeah.
And I was breathing it in for a couple of months, and it made me very ill.
Okay, I'm going to come out of blackout here. We'll get the other lights on.
And right, it made me very unwell. However,
how did it make you feel unwell? I mean, obviously, if you're
aches and pains, yeah. Dizzy, feeling sick, sleeping a lot.
How long did this go on for?
A couple of months.
A couple of months you were exposed to this sewage?
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, that sewage is generally not meant to be something you're meant to be exposed to, Tony. It's sort of kind to make you sick.
It can kill you,
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't die. I survived.
So did you go through any treatment for this or what?
Yeah, I mean, I was very unwell. I even to this day, I sometimes have. I was unwell for a long time as a result of this. I was still working and functioning quite normally, but I had aches and pains and bouts of dizziness and very, very, very bad tiredness. It had a long-term effect on me. But one of the effects was my skin changed its response to light. So in sunlight, it's like reflects the light. And then in this normal light, it's doesn't.
Now, why did you respond to the black goo?
Because that's where the black goo is. It's under the ground and it's part of the sewage.
Now, the point about the black goo is you seem to be familiar with the term black goo.
Yeah, I am.
And what does black goo mean to you?
It's a conscious fluid. It's a fluid which is sentient. And it can modify your DNA.
And this is in the sewage system of London?
It's in the sewage system, yeah. And if you get exposed to it for too long, it adjusts it modifies your DNA. And one of the effects that it had on me was my skin. I look like a snowman in sunlight, and so I don't know what else it's done to me. It could have affected my.
But the military seems to be aware of it, and they put you in a hole.
They are aware of it, yeah.
And what are they aware? What's the whole thing of? What's the bee's knees on this?
I think it's some sort of experiment with genetics, modification of genetics rather than genetic engineering with a baby. It's like someone who's already been alive for a number of years and modifying someone's DNA now. Like for instance, you've got your DNA and it's set for you, but it could be in this type of environment, it could be modified, in this lifetime rather than having to breed it, rather than having to breed the modifications.
Let's just run that again. I think you're scouting around the issue here.
Sure.
You're familiar with the black goo.
Yeah.
You were placed coincidentally were in a room which is below ground.
But these things aren't coincidences.
Well, I know that. You just said that. So you've been deliberately exposed. Let's pause. You've been deliberately exposed to this black goo, which is in the London sewage system.
Yeah.
Which is modifying human DNA.
Correct. Yeah, I'm a victim of that.
And it's conscious. Now, what do you mean it's conscious?
It's sentient.
And how do you know that?
That is what is alleged.
So somebody told you it was sentient?
I've been told a number of times.
By whom?
A friend of mine who has gone and stayed in facilities, military facilities, informed me that there is this...
a friend of yours who stayed in military?
Yeah, he's been in military facilities doing trainings and stuff.
Everybody...
Abroad. They do strange trainings, consciousness trainings, where you end up hallucinating and seeing... higher beings, and they put you in a room, a room with just white walls, and you're just in there all day staring at these white walls that are a specific shade of white, which is really garish, and eventually it starts to cause you to hallucinate.
That's a little bit different to the bathtub thing where people are blacked out.
Yeah,
same principle.
Yeah, same principle.
Instead of, in other words, it's a monotone signal to your optical system.
It slightly drives you mad. Yeah.
Pure white everywhere.
Yeah. And you start hallucinating, and you're not allowed to talk. If you talk, it slows down the process, so you have to have complete silence. And you just eat and you don't say anything, and you stay for about a month.
That's interesting. That seems to remind me of 2001: A Space Odyssey, the final scenes where he's in a white room.
Yeah.
Eating.
Yeah.
Quiet.
Yeah, I know the scene that you mean. It's similar to that.
Is there any other furniture in a room like that, or you've got to sit down?
No, there's a toilet outside, but the actual room is just white, and you go out to eat, but you spend most of your time in a room that's just.
So when you go out to eat, is it?
You're trained not to say anything, so you sit at a table with people who are also undergoing the process.
Right.
And none of you are allowed to say anything, and that increases the effectiveness of the technique. To be sitting at a table after being in a room that's completely white and not saying anything increases the effectiveness of the training.
Is that because you become more aware of the other people's sensitivities?
You start to become telepathic.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how many other people were there when you were in this room? Or was he in the room? Were you
I wasn't there. I've been informed of what goes on by him.
Is there a program name that we can associate with that?
Not that I'm aware.
So where does this happen? Are you able to say where this facility is?
It's Switzerland.
Oh, this is in Switzerland. It's not even this country.
It's not in England.
So you're flown over there. This guy was flown over there.
It's part of the deal. Yeah, your flights and everything.
And this must be an international thing then.
I believe it's done in a number of different countries, but they need to have the facility. They need to have the rooms and
What's the difference between a white room and a
it's
canteen?
It's a specific shade of white, so it's like very bright, and I'm quite sure it's a specific shade that they've researched, neurologically, because they're scientists.
What kind of light are you exposed to in this room?
It's not too bright. It's just right,
And is it sunlight balanced, or is it tungsten? Is there ultraviolet in there, infrared? Are there any differences in the light itself?
It's I believe it's like normal, not light bulbs. The fluorescent
lights.
Yeah.
They have a habit of pulsing.
It doesn't. Yeah, it might be. Maybe the pulse helps. It's because it's a frequency, isn't it?
Yeah.
They affect your consciousness. So I think that's on purpose, probably. I don't have every single detail on this. Right. I just know white rooms, not allowed to say anything, loads of hallucinations,
And what do they eat?
Quite healthy food. Like health food.
In other words, they weren't fed a particular diet which would stimulate one particular thing.
They're fed very good food, like fruit and veg.
Okay. They kept it sort of at a particular alkalinity or
yeah, it's all healthy and specific.
Yeah. Are they given
alkaline.
any pills, any other drugs,
no
any
pills.
injections?
Not that they know of. They're eating and drinking on the facility, but officially there isn't any.
Any strange tastes?
Not he didn't report any.
Yeah. Okay. Now did he volunteer this information to you? How did you get round?
The thing is, it took a while for us to be open with each other, because we've known each other for 7 years, but we used to have like a weird clash, like a personality clash. However, recently in the last year, we started meeting up every week and talking on Skype. And we, in the beginning, we just kept the subjects very bland and normal, but over time we became more honest with each other, and he knows that I've had some of these strange experiences, and he started to share with me his ones. One of them is that he's been away a number of times for 1 month each time and lived in a facility with the white rooms and everything, and he's the one that told me about the black goo. And eventually I shared with him that I had a sewage, environmental exposure.
Now, what did he say about the black goo?
Oh, he says it's sentient and it has a technology in it which modifies your DNA. It's a conscious organism, like a fluid. It's a conscious liquid.
And where did they find it? Anything about where they found it?
Apparently, it's an experimental science. It's been made by scientists, and it's been flushed into the sewage system.
So basically, they flushed it down the toilet.
Yeah.
And it hasn't gone away.
It hasn't gone away. No.
Are there any other things down there, like giant spiders?
Yeah. Yeah.
Could you describe anything like that? In other words, any other life forms?
There are not spiders like giant, like human size, but there are very strange insects down there. There's all sorts of life forms, small life forms down there.
Now, when you say down there, you're talking about a typical London sewer.
Yeah, it's crawling with life forms, as well as that black goo stuff, which is interacting with the life forms, because there's interaction between the goo and all the viruses and the bacterias and the toxins, and it's slightly radioactive. There's a lot of interaction going on down there.
Now explain that. What do you mean by interaction?
Well, the sentient goo or fluid it has a similar. Basically, some of the viruses do similar things to the goo, so they modify your DNA, and the goo is able to replicate the technology of the natural organisms like the viruses and the bacterias. So it can work with the viruses. So if the viruses, if you breathe in the viruses airborne, they can copy themselves into your DNA and slightly modify your DNA, and the goo can piggyback off the back of that and then further the process.
So the goo is essentially modifying other creatures to go to other places and then copy back to itself.
Yeah, it can do it as well itself, but it needs to ride on the back of a substance, if that makes sense.
Well, it helps.
It helps, yeah.
The goo basically staying where the sewer is, but the other things can crawl around and do other things.
With a bit of the goo in them.
Yes. Now, logically, this must mean that it must be in the humans then.
Not everyone. It depends.
Yeah.
If you need to have been exposed to it.
Yeah.
So you know, for instance, I've been exposed to it, and I've theoretically been modified by it. I've got evidence such as the skin, and my mind works a bit differently. I learnt a language around that time, and I learnt it quite quickly in about
What kind
6
of
months.
language?
Portuguese.
All right. So it wasn't a. You were able to learn the language better or quicker?
Yeah, and I wasn't able to learn another language after. So during the exposure is when I picked up the CDs, the Portuguese CDs, and started studying them. And I had an urge to study a language around that time, and it just came out of nowhere. And I learned the language.
And but since that, you can't learn any more language.
I can, but it doesn't happen really quickly. Like
in other words, has it gone back to your normal learning rate?
It's normal, yeah. It wasn't normal at the time. I was able to learn Portuguese whilst exposed and breathing in the air. I was listening to the CDs and learning the language really quickly. But then after, once it had all gone, my learning level of language went back down to normal.
So, so this is your personal experience with the black goo.
Yeah.
So you saw ordinary sewage coming, rank stinking sewage.
Yeah. Very dark sewage.
Because it had the black goo in it.
Probably.
Right. What do you mean by probably?
Well, it wasn't. There's different types of sewage. Depends on how where it is in the ground, where it's come from, what it's filtered through. But it was sewage. It was dark sewage. So it was real sewage. It wasn't.
What kind of floor was this? Were there holes in it? I mean, was it?
The floor had a bit of moss on it.
Right.
And it was.
Moss needs daylight.
There is daylight. There's a big open part at the top.
Right.
And the floor is like stone.
Sandstone.
Stone and concrete.
Right, with cracks and things.
Yeah.
So in other words, if something underneath must have really got really high level.
No, there was a plate, like
a manhole.
Something like a manhole. It was square rather than round.
Right.
And it came up out of it broke and the sewage came out.
That's
and rested on top of the ground.
I mean, that takes a lot of pressure.
There was a lot of pressure. Yeah.
Was that during raining or floods? Or?
Yeah, there was a flood. That's what it caused.
And then you were exposed to the stinking air.
Yeah.
And what did the army guy do about this?
He didn't do anything. We kept calling him up on the phone, and he just said, "Yeah, I'm going to do it. We're going to deal with it."
So how many other people were infected by this?
Only I was, because the flat was very large, and the other sections of the flat were connected to different outside parts.
So the other people in the flat
were not infected.
So you're sick, right? And you've got black goo.
Yeah.
Or brown goo, or
it was slightly green. It was like greeny brown, dark.
Yeah. And it stank of?
A mixture of different. It was such a complicated smell that you it didn't smell of poo or anything. It smelled of something very complicated. It had a very complicated smell. That's a mixture of so many different things that you can't pinpoint what you can't say.
I mean, this is a major health hazard. Could you not have reported this to the council?
No, we did. It was a major health hazard, and I suffered a lot, but it got repaired after a couple of months.
And they dug up the hole and just put concrete down on it or whatever.
I'm not sure what they did to fix it. I didn't observe.
I mean, to repair the manhole.
They completely, they repaired everything. Yeah.
Now, what evidence do you know of all these other different creatures or whatever that you're talking about?
Because, well, it's a strange. I have a connection with the substance because of what it did to me. So I know that there are viruses which, are able to copy themselves into your DNA.
I mean, that's just a standard biological thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, what's the startling thing about the black goo?
Well, because the black goo is if it's conscious, it can control that process. So there's a process there that can be used to do genetic engineering on a living organism, and it piggybacking on the viruses and all of that sort of thing, the black goo can modify people.
Who explained this to you?
To be honest, I kind of knew this intuitively. However, I had it explained to me by the man that does goes away to the place with the white room. Yes. He explained it to me. However, I kind of knew it,
After the exposure?
Yeah.
And so what is your message on this particular section? What is your message about this black goo?
Well, we got to remember that the black goo, the message about the black goo, I think it modifies people, and I'm not sure whether it chooses people for a specific reason or if it's whoever happens to get exposed to it. But I think it slightly modifies their intellect. It makes them possibly more adaptive with a type of thinking that's quite more articulated. So like giving names to things, conceptualizing things in a very complicated way.
What do you mean by complicated?
Well, if it's modified your thinking, it could make your thinking more vivid and structured with like patterns to it, like very very ordered patterns to it, rather than just everyday normal thinking. So you could look at something and sort of tear it apart, into its component parts and you articulate your thinking. I get this from when I was learning the language, whilst breathing it in.
Yeah.
The language was appearing to me in my mind as component parts of words, and the words were all appearing for me in my visualizations field of my mind, and they're all articulated like a framework, like a puzzle, like a mosaic. So
it was giving you an ability to think in much higher graphical terms.
Yeah, exactly.
Visualization
with patterns and seeing patterns in things.
So you could actually identify patterns within very complicated designs of things.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even today, things there are certain things which happen. Like for instance, I notice a lot of more. I mean, it's difficult because it's subjective, so you don't know exactly how much people notice. But if there are people walking on one side of the road and people walking on the other side of the road, I'll be aware sometimes of small movements, like if one of them moves their finger and the other one moves their elbow or something like that. I'll see both at the same time, but I'm able, sometimes I'm able to see things that are far apart, very small things simultaneously, as if I'm looking directly at each one. It's like a split consciousness.
Now, very briefly, one of the things I've been exposed to, well, we're really running out of tape on this because I'm interested in a thing called scuttlers and spider-type creatures, crab-type spider things.
Okay.
Are you familiar with anything?
Yeah.
Well, we'll talk about that on tape 3.
Okay.
And thank you very much so far. Exciting. Yeah. Okay.